Hey everybody, I'm Yasmin in for Hallie tonight, and we are coming on the air with your TikTok For You page, one step closer to being officially safe from being banned here in the United States. The president there, you're seeing him signing an executive order in just the last couple of minutes that clears the way for a deal to sell TikTok from a Chinese-based company to a group of American investors.
And I think I can say that especially the young people, they really wanted this to happen. This is going to be American operated all the way.
So the big question is, how is this actually going to work? According to senior White House officials, there's going to be a new board to oversee it, 6 seats for American investors. ByteDance, which is TikTok's original owner, is going to hold less than 20% of the stock. American users' data will be stored in the United States and overseen by the tech company Oracle. And then as for that algorithm that seems to know all of us oh so well, Oracle is actually going to get a chance to look at how that secretive tech came to be and then retrain it using U.S. user data, which leaves another big question about just how much users are actually going to see the changes here. All of this is happening after former President Biden signed this bipartisan law last year to ban TikTok if it wasn't sold to U.S. owners. Lawmakers and technology experts, they were worried about how a China-based company had access to so much American data, and users didn't take it well. Remember that big freak out everybody had when the app briefly shut down back in January.
It's just an app, but it's our whole life now.
Yeah. And to the U.S. government, I'm never forgiving you for this. Goodbye, TikTok.
Feels like we're losing, like, a community.
Okay, so it came back the next day after a freshly inaugurated President Trump promised to make a deal with China. But it just underscores how important this thing is and has become to the lives here in the United States. 1 in 5 U.S. adults use TikTok, according to new data out today. We have got team coverage on this, everybody. We've got Savannah Sellers, who has been following these developments for us out of New York. And we have Yamiche Alcindor, who's at the White House for us. Yamiche, I do want to start with you on this one. The president really kind of emphasizing the fact that Americans' data is going to be safe here. What other details did we learn from this signing?
Well, the president really touting this as a win for America. The vice president also there standing alongside him because he was involved in these negotiations. We learned that the new company is going to be valued at $14 billion, according to the vice president. And as you said, President Trump underscored over and over again that this is really going to be a deal that protects Americans because the algorithm is going to be controlled by Americans. The vice president also said there's not going to be Chinese propaganda on there, and that, in fact, it's going to be all sort of about making sure that Americans are seeing what Americans want them to see. He also talked about Oracle, and as you said, they're going to be a big part of this. They said that the Oracle had already been involved in TikTok, so they were a good expert on the app to continue to make sure that it's serving the purposes of Americans. He also named some investors, Larry Ellison being one of them. The president said while he would like it to be 100% MAGA, that every group is going to be treated fairly. So that's also some questions. Of course, there were some questions about the political tilt that TikTok might get because of these American investors. But the president essentially saying there won't be a political tilt and that everyone will be treated fairly. Very interesting. And this was, of course, a high-stakes negotiation because President Trump had essentially said he was going to get this deal done. He extended the deadline for TikTok to be shut down several times. So the president feeling very good about this and continuing to say that this is going to be good for Americans.
Listen, at one point, Yamiche, the president was in favor of banning TikTok. Right now, he really wants and needs this thing to go through, doesn't he?
He does, and it's really interesting because the president said essentially that he was very sort of not into TikTok, and then he said young people, including Charlie Kirk, who of course was that late conservative political activist who was killed recently. He said that he was one of the people who encouraged him to get on TikTok, and he believes the president that says that he believes a lot of young people got behind him in the 2024 election because of TikTok, so he came to embrace it. He also said that he was getting calls from his friends who were saying, hey, my young kids, my teens, they want this ban to be lifted. They want this to be something where TikTok, essentially, this deal goes through because the young people really want it. So very interesting to hear the president talk not only about his own political goals, but also the fact that he was getting calls from just everyday regular friends, Yasmin.
A lot going on at the White House today. I know there was also talk of Ukraine, especially with the Turkish President Erdogan earlier today, especially after we heard, of course, the meeting between Zelensky and President Trump earlier on in the week up here in New York City at the United Nations General Assembly. What came out of that meeting today?
Well, the president just spoke about this a few minutes ago. He said that he is very, quote, disappointed in Russia and this war, saying that he is looking at this war and the consequences of it for Russia, that they don't look good after this because it's been going on for nearly 4 years and they've been able to take little territory, was the way that he put it. He also said that he talked to the president of Turkey about buying military equipment. We know, of course, in his first administration, President Trump stopped Turkey from buying these fighter jets, these F-35 fighter jets, because they purchased a defense system from Russia. The president is essentially saying now he's going to open the door possibly to Turkey being let back into that, and that he might then start selling those fighter jets again to Turkey. Yasmin.
Michelle Sindor, thank you. Appreciate it. Want to bring in Savannah Sellers now, who's been following this pretty closely as well. A couple things, Savannah, you and I need to talk through here. First and foremost is the details of this thing. It's not a done deal necessarily yet. We got 120 days until it's really kind of put into motion. Walk us through what needs to happen here.
Yeah, it's not a done deal at all yet, Yasmin. And I know you've been talking about Trump is signing the TikTok deal. He was not signing the deal. As we just saw and as you smartly explained, he signed an executive order that sort of blesses the deal and says, as the president, I am good with this as what is known as a qualified divestiture. That's the language in the law that's basically the president saying, this to me qualifies as what we needed to happen behind the scenes in terms of the ownership of this app in order to meet the law. That's really all that has happened, though, Yasmin. So first, let's just talk about just from a straight up business deal perspective, right? You have the companies that are actually the ones involved, the one that has something to sell, being ByteDance with TikTok. And then you also have this company that is essentially going to buy it, really more so invest in it, because ByteDance, as you can see on your screen, still going to hold just under 20%, which is what the law stipulates there. So you have these companies investing in it. That, as you know, is going to be a deal done with a bunch of lawyers, probably in a boardroom somewhere. That will mean the deal is done. However, prior to that, I do also want to point out, we have not heard from China, at least not today, and not all that recently. It's been about a week since that call between President Trump and President Xi, which we heard the president refer to several times and say that it was a great call, say that he gave the go-ahead completely, say that he has this tremendous respect for President Xi. But we have not heard from them any more recently than that, and we also have not heard from ByteDance. So those are details we are most certainly waiting on to understand how and if this develops. In addition to that, it was sort of a bummer to me to not learn a little bit more about who these investors are. We did hear the president once again mention Michael Dell, Rupert Murdoch, and then he said 4 or 5 world-class investors. On your screen right now is exactly what I just mentioned, the Murdochs, Mr. Dell, and then as well as, of course, Larry Ellison. We've known he would be involved. He has been involved, I should note, because of Oracle, his company that hosts the data. So now the question is, how does this shake out between his investing, how much is that, versus just kind of hosting the data? We still want to know a lot more about that.
So the president was asked if this is just going to kind of be all MAGA-friendly content at one point on TikTok. And he jokingly said, listen, I would love it to be 100% MAGA-friendly content, but I'm going to be fair to all sides here. There is, though, a question of the algorithm, as I mentioned, coming to you earlier, and how this thing is really going to look to TikTok users who we know are very dedicated to the way in which TikTok is right now. So is it going to be different?
Yeah, I know. I noted that moment as well, Yasmin, and he did end up saying, no, everyone will be treated fairly. But at first he did say, I'd love if it would be 100% MAGA content, making a joke there that was received, it sounded like, with laughs in the room. I think it's a really great question because you mentioned at the top, and this is something that has certainly been said, a senior White House official told us this directly at NBC News, that they are going to retrain the algorithm on U.S. user data for a whole bunch of reasons that I don't want to make anybody's eyes glaze over. I won't go into the full tech of it, but that is a little confusing from a tech perspective, and a little bit it makes you question how real that is and what that actually looks like in practice. But when you hear the words retrain an algorithm, you think, okay, so is the algorithm going to be different? That's certainly a valid question for users, and it is also a question that does whatever the ownership structure, and really, I think more importantly, the day-to-day leadership of this company. Does the CEO stay the same? What are meetings looking like in terms of edicts that are kind of given to employees? Sure. Does the leadership structure end up having a way to influence the editorial on the app in some way? I also think that that's a valid question. I will note what Yamiche said there with people calling him. I thought it was pretty interesting to hear the president himself say that he had heard from small businesses, and that was part of changing his calculus, that they said, I will go out of business if I don't have this tool. That, to me, is a win for TikTok, because let me tell you, Yasmin, I was in D.C. a ton following all this. TikTok was flying in creators, small business business owners, putting them there on the Hill to try to pressure. And it seems like that might have worked a little bit.
This is just an answer that you may not have, but I'm curious if you do have it, which is, do we have any idea of any of these companies? Of course, you know, Oracle being one that has been mentioned over and over again, and we know they have more of a concrete role in this whole thing versus the Murdoch name and the Dell Technologies. But if they're kind of planning on hiring separate arms to run their TikTok side of the business, their TikTok side of the investments?
No, and that's a really good question. It's also interesting because as we start to get this picture of it, right, Yasmin, it's like a mix of technology companies and then also just like money guys, right? Like people with a lot of money, investment firms that really have no other connection necessarily to running a technology company or to, you know, having any real, you know, understanding maybe of how this algorithm works, what this looks like. Certainly one of the biggest questions, and I can tell you this is what people at TikTok are also thinking, is what does this mean for how this company actually works? I mentioned, does the CEO stay the same? Also just, again, day-to-day structure. If TikTok US, for all intents and purposes, becomes kind of this new entity broken off from ByteDance, as a whole, how does that shape up? I mean, you even think about, Yasmin, little things, like what does this mean for all the employee stock and things like that? Like there's so many questions about what this ends up looking like.
Savannah Sellers, thank you. By the way, there's a couple places you can see and hear Savannah. You can see more of her reporting on weekdays, 7 a.m. Eastern on Morning News Now. Also, though, Savannah is on our NBC News podcast this evening, in which we had a conversation about this deal with TikTok, wherever you get your podcast, out right now. Thanks, Savannah. Appreciate it. All right, in the last couple of minutes, the National Hurricane Center saying Tropical Storm Umberto is expected to turn into a hurricane by tomorrow and a major hurricane by this weekend. It is strengthening over the central Atlantic while another system is also developing that could end up hitting the U.S. by next week. Want to get right to meteorologist Bill Cairns, who's standing by for us with this as well. What is the latest on these threats here, Bill, and what areas are most at risk?
Yeah, this is complicated. So one of these storms is going to miss probably just about everyone. The other one has a chance in about 96 hours, 4 days from now, of either being a tropical storm or a hurricane right along the southeast coast. So that gets everyone's attention because we really haven't done it this season yet. So this is Umberto, and then this is that area of interest, now up to about a 90% chance that it does develop into a tropical depression, and then it will be tropical storm Imelda eventually. We're also saying goodbye to Gabriel. That's over by the Azores. So we'll focus on these two. First off, with Umberto. The reason that we're not going to focus a lot of energy on this is almost all of our ensemble lines, all of our predictions take this thing and then curve it back out to sea. Almost none of them are affecting the East Coast. What'll be interesting is how Umberto and how strong it gets. It's supposed to get to a Category 3. Its impact on what will be Imelda as it heads up through the Bahamas. So this gets your attention. This is our American GFS models, and you can see these little squiggly lines all heading up here into the Carolinas. So this is where you need to be getting your preparations. Make sure you have all your hurricane plans in place. You don't need to execute them yet, but make sure you have everything in order in case you are given, orders from your emergency managers as we go throughout the upcoming weekend. Notice a couple of these lines turn safely out to sea. That would be from Umberto actually pulling and tugging. So as of now, our American models keep these far enough apart that Umberto, which is stronger, doesn't pull this off the coast. But some of our AI weather models, yes, now we even have AI weather models, are actually showing more of an impact pulling it out to sea. So it's going to be interesting. But as of now, our American model and the European model both are in agreement with taking it up through the Bahamas as a tropical storm, then either a strong tropical storm or hurricane, Yasmin, as we go into Monday evening. So that's the time frame. We'll fine-tune this, but as I said, expect changes because this one's complicated.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to be getting updates throughout the hour as it gets closer to the East Coast. Bill Cairns for us for now. Thank you. In the last few hours, officials given this update on the investigation into the shooting at a Dallas ICE facility on Wednesday. They now say the shooter very likely acted alone and was targeting ICE officers, not detainees. We are also learning today that there were around 8 to 10 detainees in the van when the gunman opened fire, an ICE official telling NBC News this. The 3 victims that were shot in that van, one of them died and 2 other detainees are still in critical condition. The shooter died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The president placing blame on what he is calling radical left rhetoric that led to this attack. But family members and those who knew the 29-year-old Texas gunman say he didn't have strong political feelings.
Radical left rhetoric. The radical left is causing the problem. They're out of control, but the radical left is causing this problem. Not the right, the radical left. And it's going to get worse, and ultimately it's going to go back on them. I mean, bad things happen when they play these games.
Just a reminder here, the FBI says a bullet found near the shooter had the words anti-ICE written on it. And Vice President J.D. Vance called him a violent left-wing extremist. Want to bring in Ryan Chandler for us, who's been following this from Dallas. I think a few things we need to nail down here, which is if you could kind of draw more upon what we've learned about the motive here for the shooter and why it is officials are so sure, in fact, the shooter was targeting ICE officials versus detainees.
So if we put together all the evidence that the FBI has presented in the last 24 hours, it paints a picture of a troubled young man with toxic anti-ICE views. Just given the evidence that FBI Director Kash Patel has presented, for example, they say that the best evidence of his motive is his own writings. They say that they found handwritten notes explaining that the job of ICE is, quote, human trafficking, saying that the men and women who show up to this ICE office are collecting a dirty paycheck. So they leave no room for ambiguity here, painting this shooter as somebody who was deliberately targeting ICE agents for political motives. I just want you to listen to a little bit of what the acting U.S. attorney said about this suspect, because she put it in no uncertain terms.
He called the ICE employees people showing up to collect a dirty paycheck. He wrote that he intended to maximize lethality against ICE personnel. The tragic irony for his evil plot here is that it was a detainee who was killed and 2 other detainees that were injured. This, what he did, is the very definition of terrorism.
So while tragically 1 detainee did lose their life and 2 more critically injured, they were not the target. Officials say that he fired indiscriminately at this van trying to hit ICE officials. Fortunately, none of them were hurt.
This is, Ryan, the second instance in 2 weeks of a gunman setting up a rifle on a rooftop and putting messages on bullets. There are elements here of this shooting that are raising new questions about copycat style attacks, a trend, really.
A 1,000% increase in assaults on officers. That's the figure that officials keep pointing to, linking it to dangerous rhetoric. And we know that we are not seeing this attack in a vacuum. We see politically motivated violence across the spectrum, especially against some law enforcement officers. We have a list of some here, some of which were in Texas. Just on July 4th, we had an officer shot outside an ICE detention facility in Alvarado, Texas, just a little bit south of here in Dallas. You had another man who acted as if he had a bomb at a facility as well. All of these instances across the country that officials are pointing to, linking it directly to what they call violent rhetoric, demonizing the work of ICE and, as they put it, inspiring violence against them, Yasmin.
Ryan Chandler for us. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it. In the last few minutes, we heard President Trump pointing the finger at Democrats for the potential government shutdown, saying they, in his words, don't know what they're doing. His comments are coming as the White House threatens mass firings if Congress doesn't reach a deal to fund the government before next Wednesday. That is according to a memo from the Office of Management and Budget obtained by NBC News, warning federal agencies to brace for a, quote, reduction in force, potentially raising the stakes with Democrats and Republicans in another standoff over spending. I want to bring in Ryan Nobles to talk more about this. There's a couple of things we need to get through here, and I think we got to first talk about the firings, the potential of these firings, if in fact there's a shutdown. What agencies does it seem as if the president is targeting here?
I think if you're a federal employee tonight, Yasmin, you're concerned because there seems to be a broad reach, which the Office of Management and Budget is targeting as it relates to these possible mass firings if a shutdown were to take place on October 1st. According to this memo that was obtained by NBC News, they describe there is a group of specifics that they're looking for is connected to these different firings, this possibility of firings. It would all be programs, projects, or activities, which include the discretionary funding running out on October 1st, which is a big portion of the government, and there's no other source of funding that would be available for somewhere else. else. And then this is the key part. That's not consistent with the president's priorities. And that allows the Office of Management and Budget on some level to make political decisions as it relates to government funding, which would then be out of the hands of Congress. So this is a very different approach that the administration has taken with these shutdown fights. Normally, government workers are furloughed. Some are forced to come to work if they're essential but not get paid. But they always end up getting paid afterwards, and they're always able to keep their job. As we head into this shutdown fight, those guarantees do not exist, which is making a lot of people in the federal workforce very nervous tonight.
I want to talk about the blame game as well. What are Dems here holding out for?
Well, the Dems say that they would like some assurances as it relates to health care in particular. If we're getting specific, there is a group of subsidies connected to the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare that they would like to see extended. They're scheduled to expire at the end of the year. They'd also like to claw back some of those cuts from Medicaid that were part of Donald Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill. That's a non-starter for Republicans right now. They just want to extend the current spending levels for 7 weeks and then negotiate these bigger, tougher issues out over that period of time. Democrats want to make the deal now.
Over under this thing, they shut it down, Ryan?
I'd say we're probably in the 75 to 80% range. My shutdown-o-meter is starting to spike, Yasmin, but there's nothing Congress loves more than a deadline. So right now things don't look great, but we'll see what's happening as we get closer to midnight on September 30th.
Procrastinators in chief coming out of the Hill. That is for darn sure. Ryan Nobles for us. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, Sean Diddy Combs, he's back in court today for the first time since his verdict reading for a hearing that will help decide how long he's going to stay in prison. A smiling Combs waved to his supporters as he entered court, his mom and twin daughters sitting behind him as his lawyers argued that he should be sentenced to just 14 months in prison. That means he would actually get out immediately. But prosecutors say the hip-hop mogul should spend at least a couple more years behind bars. Diddy's set to be officially sentenced next week and could face up to 20 years after he was found guilty of prostitution-related charges. We should note that he was cleared of the more serious sex trafficking, racketeering offenses as well. Want to bring in Chloe Malas to talk more about this. What are the clues we're getting? Are we getting any nods from the judge here as to what Diddy is facing?
This judge, and I sat through all of this trial, right? I covered it from the beginning to the end. It started in May. It went until early July. Remember, Combs has been behind bars since September of 2024. It's been a year. He keeps his cards close to the vest, Judge Subramanian. What we do know is that the judge felt as though he was such a threat to the general public that he did not grant him bail ahead of the trial. And we also don't know if he's going to get any time served outside of the few months that he's been at the Metropolitan Detention Center since he was convicted up until now. What about all of the pre-trial time that he has served? Things got really heated in the courtroom today because his legal team is still doing what they do best, and that is, you know, they charge by the hour, and they are still fighting. And what were they fighting for today? They are trying to get of transportation to engage in prostitution overturned.
You want to get thrown out.
They want it thrown out because they say that this all stems from something called the Mann Act that was a federal bill, federal law passed in 1910. And they say that this is really racially motivated. This was used against some really famous individuals, including musician Chuck Berry, boxer Jack Johnson, and that it has been racially applied over the years. And basically they're saying, look, this is nothing more than a man that likes threesomes. This is nothing more than a man that likes pornography. That this never would have
arguments they were making in court.
This never would have made its way inside a federal courtroom had he not been charged with racketeering and sex trafficking, both of which he was acquitted. The judge did not make a decision. He said, look, I'll look into this. I'll get back to you. But he also said, I'll see you next Friday. And that's the day of sentencing. He could face up to 20 years in prison. He likely will not get that. Prosecutors want him to serve about 5 years. His team's hoping that he's going to be released. I don't think he's going to be that lucky. I think he's going to get sent to federal prison somewhere, probably California, because that's where his children live. And he's looking at probably a couple years behind bars and his team appealing.
You're on this for us. We appreciate you.
I'll be there in front of the courthouse Friday.
Thank you. All right, still ahead. Several weaknesses now being blamed for those deadly LA wildfires. Details from a just-released report in the search for answers. Plus, a wild and risky ride down Mount Everest. We'll explain. Coming up. All right, welcome back. Just in the last hour, officials in LA holding a briefing on a new report that blames outdated policies, staffing shortages, and a lack of resources for delays in the response to those deadly wildfires back in January.
The Eaton fire was a catastrophic and complex incident. Providing answers is not a simple task, and this report is not a one and done. To our survivors, I wish there was one specific issue that was identified in this report that could have changed the course of history.
You remember the scenes of those catastrophic fires tearing through Los Angeles, killing at least 30 people, destroying thousands of homes. Want to bring in Dana Griffin, who's standing by for us on this. We all remember, as I just mentioned, those images, right? Entire neighborhoods just burning to the ground. Thousands of people literally losing everything. Tell us more about what's in this report. What went wrong here?
Yeah, so Yasmin, this outside independent group could not pinpoint one single point of failure, but they say that there were several series of weaknesses which contributed to delayed responses for evacuation orders. This group came in, they looked at thousands of pieces of data. They interviewed residents to try to get a firsthand look, and they essentially discovered that there were lapses in communication because across 3 different agencies, which included LA Fire, the Sheriff's Office, and the Office of Emergency Management, there was not one single form of communication. There was no tool. People were texting, emailing, using the radio, and so that hampered the ability for everyone to kind of be on the same page. And some residents say that they had those evacuation orders delayed to the point that some of them say that their homes were already burning when those alerts went out. And most of the deaths in the Eaton fire, 19, most of those occurred in West Altadena. And so there were some coordination issues there. So officials listed that, plus an outdated software, and actually the fear of overwarning, which could have maybe caused panic and caused some congestion when it came to evacuating. Yasmin?
So amidst this report, we're not just learning about what went wrong, but what actually needs to happen, the recommendations that need to be put into practice to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. What are those recommendations, and what is the likelihood they'll be put into practice before the next fire season?
Well, I can tell you that the sheriff just spoke moments ago, and he says that they are committed to making sure that they implement these changes so that they do not have any other disasters like what we saw here in January. So some of the recommendations are to streamline evacuation roles and to expand this across agency, to include better training, joint planning, and they even said maybe you should plan and do some evacuations and rehearsals, not only with the department, but with residents in these communities. Upgrade aging equipment and fill those staffing gaps that they say they had not only in the sheriff's office, but also the Office of Emergency Management. They want them to modernize software and to improve public safety alerts and community outreach so that everyone knows what to do if a situation like this happens again. But the sheriff also reiterated that this was one of the most devastating natural disasters to hit Los Angeles County, and so they are committed to learning from these mistakes and hopefully in hopes that it doesn't happen again.
Dana Griffin, thank you. Appreciate it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Amazon reaching a historic $2.5 billion settlement with the FTC over allegations the company tricked customers into paying for Prime memberships and making it hard for people to cancel them. Amazon is going to now refund 35 million people. They're not admitting to any wrongdoing, according to the settlement. The company telling NBC News in part, quote, this: Amazon and our executives have always followed the law, and this settlement allows us to move forward and focus on innovating for customers. Number 2, 2 Syracuse University students are now accused of committing a hate crime after one of them allegedly threw a bag of pork into a Jewish frat house. Police say the fraternity was celebrating Rosh Hashanah at the time. The university is calling it a deeply troubling incident. The district attorney's office did not immediately respond to NBC's request for comment. Number 3, Starbucks says it's going to lay off 900 employees and close a couple of hundred stores after already laying off 1,000 corporate employees earlier this year. It is all coming as Starbucks makes this push to remodel its stores and become a hangout spot for customers. Number 4, a Polish athlete making history as the first person to ever ski down Mount Everest without any extra oxygen. You can see the 37-year-old right here. He climbed for around 16 hours to the summit. Then he skied all the way down, only relying on his lungs. That is incredible. All right, number 5, a sequel to Spaceballs is in the works. Amazon says it's making a part 2 to the 1987 classic. Rick Moranis is coming out of retirement to star in it. Other familiar faces are going to include Mel Brooks, Bill Pullman, and some newcomers, Keke Palmer, Josh Gad. All at the table, right there, reading through those scripts. The sequel is coming out soon. All right, coming up. How unexplained drone sightings are making a mess of air travel in part of Europe. Why some say this is Russia trolling NATO. Plus, inside the rescue of a California man who became trapped after falling off a cliff. All right, Europe is on edge tonight after a wave of drone flyovers forced flight cancellations at 4 airports in Denmark with suspicions that Russia is behind it all. Danish officials say flyovers are meant to sow fear. Russia, for its part, says the drones are a, quote, state provocation, and they reject any speculation that they are involved. NATO is now warning Russia to stop. It's calling escalatory actions after Russian drones also entered Estonian airspace last week. NATO warships are conducting exercises in a massive show of force across Europe. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, is leading the way in naval drills. Matt Bodner is joining us now from Oslo, Norway, to talk more about this. Hey, Matt, you actually spent some time on board the USS Ford yesterday. What message are these NATO maneuvers sending to Russia?
Well, thanks, Yasmin. Well, obviously, this is a massive NATO maneuver. It's taking place in the North Sea. That's where we were on the Ford yesterday. There's also NATO ships in the Baltic and in the Mediterranean, NATO ground forces in Eastern Europe. And this is basically an effort to demonstrate that NATO can coordinate across multiple militaries and multiple theaters, all with an eye on the east. That would be to say Russia. And so one of the core messages here that NATO is sending is that it doesn't actually need to deploy a large amount of military equipment permanently in Eastern Europe. It can get to Eastern Europe very quickly and respond to anything that might happen there. And while we were on the Ford yesterday, we actually spoke to her strike group commander, that is Rear Admiral Paul Lanzalota, and he had this to say to us.
You can take this ship and the ships around us and move several hundred miles overnight and then operate from there. And the aircraft that operate from the flight deck, as you probably can tell, they go hundreds of miles in and of themselves. So our touch can reach a far distance from the ship.
So we actually heard from NATO officials separately that some of the planes that we saw take off from the Ford yesterday, they were actually flying, some of them, 1,000 miles to the east, to Finland, Poland, Lithuania, to patrol, but also to take part in live fire exercise with NATO forces there.
So while we've got this kind of show of force between NATO countries, we also had President Trump this week with some pretty harsh criticism for European allies.
It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you, I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell.
So he's talking about European countries there, saying they're going to hell. He has made a bit of an about face amidst that criticism when it comes to Ukraine, turning away from Russian President Vladimir Putin. Is Putin here threatening Europe to not support Ukraine the way in which he feels as if the United States is doing now?
That's a great question, and that's actually, one of the conversations that's happening here in Europe is, obviously President Trump is sort of shifting back and forth quite regularly on this issue, and there is pressure that is being obviously placed on Europe. The European allies are the target of these drone incursions, and essentially what it looks like the Kremlin is trying to do is to convince them, let's say, for example, the United States, whatever it does, says that NATO can buy weapons to support Ukraine to whatever extent it wants to. That's certainly what the White House is signaling now. The Kremlin is now trying to make things extremely uncomfortable for the European allies and sort of split them, get them on different pages on how to respond to this. We've seen some discussion on how to respond, for example, to drone incursions. There's been a lot of talk about should we shoot down a future Russian aircraft incursion. And there have been some dissenting voices on this saying that that's exactly what Putin wants. So he is testing the Europeans now.
Matt Bodner, it looks cold there, so stay warm while you're outside doing these live hits for us. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, NBC covers hundreds of stories every day, and because it's tough to read, watch, or listen to all of them, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment that we call The Local. Out of our Southern Bureau, a construction worker in Florida now in the hospital after a wall fell on him in Fort Lauderdale. The man apparently working in a trench when the wall crumbled on top of him. Rescue crews pulled him out of the rubble. He was seriously hurt, but is expected to be okay. Building inspectors are investigating how exactly this happened. Out of our Western Bureau, a bike ride in San Diego taking a super dangerous turn. Look at this. Border Patrol agents rescuing a mountain biker who fell off a 50-foot cliff and into a remote canyon there. The agents were coincidentally monitoring the area when they heard a cry for help. He'd been stranded for nearly 6 hours and was seriously hurt in the fall. Crews airlifted him to a nearby hospital. Out of our Northeast Bureau, New York subway riders are about to hear a new voice while riding across stations in the city.
Ride safe, keep it cute, and keep it moving.
Yes, that is the one and only Cardi B, the newest voice behind the PSAs for the MTA. It's all part of the latest push to cut down dangerous behavior in subways. The rapper's announcements will run through the end of the year. All right, welcome back. Golfers and golf fans are gathering in New York for a tournament really unlike any other, the Ryder Cup. It takes place every 2 years. The best golfers from the U.S. facing off against the best of Europe, not for a prize, but for pride, national pride, that is. And cheering on the Americans this year, noted golf fan President Donald Trump. Here are the teams. You've got big names from the two rival golf leagues, LIV and PGA Tour. World #1 ranked Scotty Scheffler. #3, Xander Schauffele, competing for the States. They're taking on guys like #2 ranked Rory McIlroy and Tommy Fleetwood for the Europeans. The players talking to the press about what this tournament means to them.
We are here and we are playing for history, and we're playing for the players that came before us. We're also playing for the guys that are going to come behind us.
We're very proud to be Americans. I think the flag means a lot to us. So to have our president here and for us to be able to represent the United States of America, albeit in a golf tournament, is extremely important to us.
All right, the Golf Channel's Rex Hogard is at Bethpage, taking a break from the rain out there, coming inside to talk to us. Rex, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. I got to be honest with you, Rex. I don't know a ton about golf as we go into this conversation, but I do have to say that this tournament kind of seems like it's my kind of vibe. What are you looking forward to when the teams tee off tomorrow?
I think this is right up your alley. I think this is right up any sports fans' alley. I didn't say golf fans because this really isn't a golf tournament. I know we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the golf, but unlike every other event you cover on the PGA Tour or the majors or anything else you would talk about, this just transcends the sport. It goes to the level of a big sporting event. And then you transplant that to Bethpage Black, which is just outside of New York City. And these fans, which we know how they can be, it really creates an atmosphere that we don't get to see in this sport very often.
I understand the kind of usual politeness of golf clap is no longer with this tournament, which I do like because I am a loud person.
I think it would be a lot of that. I think there's going to be some New York fans. I was talking with a member of the European team this afternoon, and I kind of said, well, what do you expect? What's the anticipation? He thought about it for a minute, and he goes, it's going to be gross, but that's what you get in other sports. I think the comparison is what you end up with, and I recently went to a game at Yankee Stadium, and look, the home team gets booed, the away team gets booed, some things get said that probably aren't very nice that you would never say in front of your mother. I think that's what we're going to end up with this week, and it depends. It could very well impact the competition because these are things, as you pointed out, these are players who are used to polite claps and people not saying things to them from the gallery that you don't want to hear. And certainly it's going to factor into the competition, but I would argue it's what makes this event special.
So to be clear, they're going to be clapping through the play? They're going to be able to say whatever they want?
I don't know if they're going to be say whatever they want. I think the PGA of America, which runs this event, has been pretty clear about they are going to police the crowd to a certain degree. However, we're talking about a couple thousand people, so I'm not quite sure what they're going to be able to do. I've covered 2 U.S. Opens at this golf course, and yeah, they pretty much say what they want. And now you factor in the idea that this is Europe against the United States and all the emotions that brings to it. I would anticipate there to be things said here that you would probably hear at Yankee Stadium.
Yeah. Talk about the venue here, Bethpage Black.
I think it's one of the special venues in all of golf. As I said, this is hosted 2 U.S. Opens. It's hosted a couple of PGA Tour playoff events. This week is different, though. The way they set it up, it's usually a very difficult, demanding test. It's a big ballpark. But this week, you play a little bit easier. You want to keep in mind that you want to see holes won with birdies and eagles, not so much pars and bogeys. So I think players will be a little bit more aggressive, but you still have to drive the ball really well, and it will identify the best players.
Let us hope the weather cooperates better tomorrow than it has so far today. Rex Hogard, otherwise, make sure you have your umbrella out there as you're covering this tournament. Appreciate you. We're going to be watching as the Ryder Cup tees off tomorrow on Golf Channel USA Network. And you can find coverage all weekend on NBC and Peacock starting Saturday at 7 a.m. Eastern. Do not miss it. That is a wrap for this hour. Reminder, you can catch me on our new podcast, Here's the Scoop. We're going to have much more on the TikTok deal and potential government shutdown. That is wherever you get your podcast. But here on NBC News Now, coverage picks up right now. All right, right now, the mission to rescue TikTok in the U.S. taking a major step forward, with the president in the last hour or so signing an executive order clearing the way for TikTok to be sold to a group of American investors. What we know about the deal and whether your For You page could look and sound a little different under the new owners. Then trouble is brewing in the Atlantic with Tropical Storm Umberto threatening the East Coast. Where the storm might be headed and how big of a punch it could actually pack. Plus, new details in that shooting, which left an ICE detainee dead and 2 others in critical condition. Why police think the shooter acted alone and was going after ICE officers, not the detainees. And then the finger pointing has begun, with the clock ticking closer and closer towards a possible government shutdown, how the government is prepping for mass firings, if in fact it happens. And then we got this new report from LA officials. Blame game for those deadly wildfires that hit the city back in January. How they say staffing shortages and a lack of resources doomed the response. Hey, everybody, I'm Yasmin in for Hallie tonight, and we are coming on the air with your TikTok For You page, one step closer to being officially safe from being banned here in the U.S. The president, they're signing an executive order in just the last hour or so that clears the way for a deal to sell TikTok from a Chinese-based company to a group of American investors.
And I think I can say that especially the young people, they really wanted this to happen. This is going to be American operated all the way.
So how is this whole thing going to work? According to senior White House officials, there's going to be a new board to oversee it, 6 seats for American investors. ByteDance, TikTok's original owner, is going to hold less than 20% of the stock. American users' data is going to be stored in the U.S. and overseen by the tech company Oracle. And then as for that algorithm that seems to know all of us so well, Oracle is going to get a chance to look at how that secretive tech came to be and then retrain it using U.S. user data. I'm going to break that down for you in a little bit in case you didn't really understand it, which leaves a very big question about just how much users are going to actually be able to feel that change. All this is happening after former President Biden signed a bipartisan law last year to ban TikTok if it wasn't sold to U.S. owners. Lawmakers, technology experts were worried about how a China-based company had access to so much American data. And users didn't take it well. You remember that big freak out everybody had when the app briefly shut down in January.
It's just an app, but it's our whole life now.
To the U.S. government, I'm never forgiving you for this.
Goodbye, TikTok. Feels like we're losing, like, a community.
It's going to be okay. It came back the next day after a freshly inaugurated President Trump promised to make a deal with China. But it underscores just how important this app has become here in the U.S. to people's daily lives. 1 in 5 U.S. adults use TikTok, according to new data out today. We've got team coverage on this, everybody. Vaughn Hilliard is covering the White House for us. Savannah Sellers is here in New York. I want to start with you, Savannah. You and I have been talking throughout the day. You actually are showing up on the podcast this evening as well.
I think it's my first time.
It is your first time. And one of the big questions, Vaughn has been on it as well, just a heads up.
Hey, Vaughn. We love you.
I think one of the big questions was the investors, right? The names we were looking for. Who's going to be on the board? What did we learn?
Okay, so we did not get as much detail as I was hoping for. I wanted to, jump into the room to be able to ask more questions. And I think really, though, what's kind kind of revealing about that is that some of this is not a done deal, which is quite interesting. That's also a headline here, right? Like I know you've been saying, like the TikTok deal, the deal's not done. This was basically just President Trump blessing the plan that has been presented to him. It seems pretty clear based on words from President Trump as well as Vice President J.D. Vance, who had been tasked by Trump with really getting this over the finish line. It was him and his office that was working on this. In fact, Sean Cooksey was also name-checked as a thank you. That's the vice president's lead counsel. He was the lead negotiator here. So really a lot of information coming from them that actually indicated a lack of things that have been completed. So we still don't know exactly what that investment structure is going to look like. Reporting is kind of coming out in little leaks, but they did not confirm anything and actually said it might be a few more weeks before we have those details. What you see on your screen right now is coming from our friends over at CNBC. This is a potential look at what this investor breakdown could be. Yeah. That 19.9 is very specific and purposeful for ByteDance. That is according to the law. They can only hold less than 20%. So you see they're going right up to the line there. Also getting one board seat. I will, though, mention this is the second time that the only three specific names the president has mentioned is Larry Ellison, Michael Dell, and the Murdoch family.
Which we kind of knew going into today.
We knew going into today. We had that graphic ready to go since Sunday when the president name-checked those exact same people. What we do know for sure here, of course, Larry Ellison, Oracle, they've been involved with TikTok for a long time. That's nothing new. What we want to know is exactly what their investment is going to increase to, because rather than just kind of like, you know, operating for the app, running the data, all that type of stuff, they now also are believed to be investors here. And then, very important, taking over sort of the management of the algorithm, according to the president and vice president.
So walk through that with us. As I was coming to you, obviously, I talked about the algorithm and said we're going to walk through this later on in case you didn't really understand me there. So how could this algorithm change? I know there was concerns about that. And then, of course, it comes to data privacy, right? Not sharing our data. How do we know that that's actually going to be kept safe?
Yeah, it does. And I'm going to also do I'm going to do my best at explaining this. And I know a lot about it from reporting on it, but I'm obviously not like somebody who's built an algorithm before. But here's why it's confusing. The way that you explained it is correct. A senior White House official said that a copy of the algorithm comes over here to the United States, and then they are going to retrain it with U.S. user data. Here, though, is why that's sort of confusing. The reason the TikTok algorithm is so good, the reason this app has been so successful, is because they are very unique in that their algorithm changes so frequently. It is constantly adapting to what it is learning about you based on how you are sort of similar to other users on the app and different videos that you liked and connected with. And it knows that by how long you spend on a video, how much you search for certain types of videos. So to say that an algorithm, is coming over here and going to be trained on U.S. user data, it's just a little misleading because the algorithm that's coming is because of all the data that it's already been trained on, right? I imagine that is a hope at making national security a little bit better by saying, look, we're only going to feed it this stuff from U.S. users, therefore it can't be manipulated with Chinese content. It remains to be seen if that will work. It also, you hear retrain, you certainly think, does that mean the algorithm is going to feel different to a user?
Can I just ask you real quick, do TikTok users even care about their data being shared at this point?
No, I think it's a great question. I don't really think so, but they do care about their algorithm. So your first question was absolutely right, and I think that's the headline here for users. They don't care who's investing in what percentage. It's just like, so does this app look the same or not?
Savannah Sellers, thank you. And you can get more of Savannah's reporting on this story and much more weekdays on Morning News Now at 7 a.m. Eastern and again on the podcast tonight. Said it enough. All right, let's bring in Vaughn Hilliard now to talk about the White House perspective on this whole thing. The vice president there emphasizing some pushback with China on a deal. What are we learning, Vaughn, about how this deal actually came together?
Right. Number one, first of all, if I was Oracle, I'd be trying to pick off Savannah Sellers from Comcast to come help run the algorithms because she's on it. I think she did a great job explaining it. And frankly, this is where you have seen, right? It was in 2024 that folks will recall bipartisan members of Congress with the signature of then President Biden signed into law banning TikTok if it was not turned over to American investors. And that is where TikTok went dark just days before Donald Trump's inauguration back in January. And then President Trump signed now 3 different executive orders, essentially pushing back the timeline to which American investors could negotiate between the Trump administration and ByteDance to try to put it mostly into American hands and have the algorithm use American data. And so that is the point that we are at here right now. That deadline had come last week, and that is where you saw Vice President Vance standing there. His team had played a critical role in these negotiations. And so the president said that he wanted to save TikTok. It's a big difference from back in 2020 when he signed an executive order trying to ban it for national security purposes. But now this is a moment where he said that he believe that it helped him win the 2024 election, and he heard from young people that they said that they did not want it to disappear from their phones.
Well, it's interesting that you said that because, you know, in the show, we just did this piece on Podcast Bros that Julie Sirkin did, which was really great, and how the president might be kind of losing some momentum from some of his podcast bros, including guys like Joe Rogan. But he understands the power of social media, right? And how TikTok users especially, how social media users especially have supported him throughout his campaign in 2024. How important is it for him for this deal to actually go through now?
It's one of his campaign promises. He said that he would save TikTok. And I think nobody is under any false pretense to understand that he, in the last months of the 2024 election, really made a strong play to Gen Z, but millennials, about the understanding of the need to go not only appear on these podcasts, but also save TikTok. And so that is what his administration fought to do. As Savannah said, there are still a lot of questions here of just exactly how will that algorithm be retrained. There is still about a 120-day closing process. This is going to have to go through some regulatory processes within U.S. agencies. And of course, this is going to come down to China and ByteDance ultimately giving final approval as well. So this is a step in the right direction for those that want TikTok to not disappear. But there are still, we should be careful in noting, as Savannah did, that there is still some hurdles here these next months for it to go through.
Von Hilliard, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, friend.
All right, tonight, the National Hurricane Center saying Tropical Storm Umberto is expected to turn into a hurricane by tomorrow and then a major hurricane by this weekend. It is strengthening over the central Atlantic, and then another system is also developing that could end up hitting the U.S. by next week. Want to get right to meteorologist Bill Cairns, who's standing by for us. So, of course, the obvious questions here: how big, how bad, where is it going, and when is it coming?
Yeah, everyone in the Southeast, we have your attention. I know that. But now you want the details, right? You want to know, like, how strong is this going to be? How devastating? Do I need to evacuate? And all those questions will be answered in the days ahead, but not yet. There's still too many unknown variables. Let me kind of explain. So these are the two systems, this bright white batch of clouds here and the one that's in between Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. So this is Umberto. This is the one that's going to be a more powerful storm, likely a major hurricane over the upcoming weekend. How strong this area gets is yet to be decided because it has to organize first, and then does Umberto, because it's such a big, powerful hurricane, influence it and steal from it and maybe make it weaker with wind shear? So that's a possibility. So first, let's start with the known. We know that Umberto is going to take a path similar to this, maybe a little slower, maybe a little faster than this, but the general trend is in between Bermuda and the Outer Banks, safely out at sea. No direct impacts. There will be some waves that'll be at the coast, rip currents, that sort of thing. Then the area that we're going to be more concerned with is the one that's off the Dominican Republic. And by the way, here's all the spaghetti models for Umberto. And notice only like 2 out of like 75 impact the U.S. That's why we feel very confident that's not going to be a direct impact. But here's that disturbance, which will eventually become a tropical depression, probably by the time we get to Saturday morning, maybe a tropical storm on Sunday. And then you notice all of these lines heading up to the Carolina coast here. So that gets your attention quickly. And all of our models mostly are thinking it'll be a tropical storm or a lower-end hurricane. Nothing is saying it's going to be like a big, bad hurricane or a major hurricane. But even a tropical storm in this region or a low-end hurricane, if it stalls out, it's there long enough, we could have a big problem with rain and flooding. And, of course, we will get the beach erosion and those problems, too. So our American model brings it somewhere into areas of South Carolina. Our European model is in excellent agreement with this. The one thing that's interesting, and that, our new world that we're in, Yasmin, Google, it's called DeepMind, they have a weather model that's run by artificial intelligence, AI, and that is actually saying it's going to stay off the coast, disagreeing with our old school traditional models. So this will be one of the first big tests of our artificial intelligence heading into the world of tropical predictions.
We're watching you, AI. We are watching. Bill Cairns, thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you for watching. In the last few hours, officials giving an update on the investigation to the shooting at a Dallas ICE facility on Wednesday. They now say the shooter very likely acted alone and was targeting ICE officers, not detainees. We are also learning today that there were around 8 to 10 detainees in the van when the gunman opened fire, an ICE official telling NBC News. The 3 victims were shot in that van. 1 of them died. 2 other detainees are still in critical condition. The shooter died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The president placing blame on what he calls radical left rhetoric that led to this attack. But family members and those who knew the 29-year-old Texas gunman say he didn't have strong political feelings.
Radical left rhetoric. The radical left is causing the problem. They're out of control, but the radical left is causing this problem, not the right, the radical left. And it's going to get worse, and ultimately it's going to go back on them. I mean, bad things happen when they play these games.
The FBI says a bullet found near the shooter had the words anti-ICE written on it, and Vice President J.D. Vance called him a violent left-wing extremist. Ryan Chandler is joining us now from Dallas, Texas, and covering the story for us. So I think the big question is, was this politically motivated, right? And it seemed as if we have some kind of mixed reporting, especially coming from the shooter's family, which we spoke to yesterday, that NBC News spoke to yesterday. What's the answer here? Are they confident it was politically motivated?
They are leaving no ambiguity on that fact. They say that this was politically motivated beyond a shadow of a doubt, and they say the only evidence you need of his motivation is his own writings. They point to handwritten notes. They say that this suspect left behind, calling the work of ICE, quote, human trafficking, saying that the people who show up here at this ICE office are collecting a dirty paycheck. They say that he was toxically anti-ICE and acted out in violence motivated by political leaning. So I want you to listen to a little bit of what this FBI special agent in charge here said on that.
The challenge with these mass casualty incidents is people can be motivated to violence by any number of grievances. In this case, the clearest indication of motivation are his own words. He wanted to cause terror.
The evidence is clear that this was intended as an assault on ICE personnel who come to work every day to do their job. Violent rhetoric has led to over 1,000% increase in assaults on ICE officers, and it has to stop.
And as you mentioned, some incongruent characterizations from his brother and from those who knew him. They say that this suspect was not particularly politically motivated, saying that they were surprised that he would resort to violence of this kind. But clearly, the FBI's evidence painting a very different picture tonight.
This is, Ryan, the second instance in 2 weeks of a gunman setting up a rifle on a rooftop, putting messages on the bullets as well. It feels like a copycat attack.
Right, and the FBI is quick to point out that this did not happen in isolation. This is part of a string of tragic political violence that we've seen in this country, as you allude to. And ICE says that they've seen a 1,000% increase in assaults on officers, and they link that directly to what they call violent rhetoric, urging everybody to tone down the demonization of the job that ICE is doing, which is certainly controversial. It is certainly it can attract some good faith, legitimate criticisms from those on all sides of the political spectrum. But they are very wary of the way that their job is characterized in the media, on social media, from their detractors. And they say that their officers are on high alert. Their families are worried as they go to work every day that this job is becoming more and more dangerous for them. Yasmin.
Ryan Chandler, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, let's talk about Sean Diddy Combs back in court today for the first time since his verdict reading for a hearing that's going to help decide how long he's going to stay in prison. A smiling Combs waved to his supporters as he entered court. His mom and his twin daughters sitting behind him as his lawyers argued that he should be sentenced to just 14 months in prison. That means he would get out immediately. The prosecutors say the hip-hop mogul should spend at least a couple more years behind bars. Diddy's set to be officially sentenced next week, could face up to 20 years. After he was found guilty of prostitution-related charges. We should note that he was cleared of the more serious sex trafficking and racketeering offenses as well. I want to bring in Chloe Malas on this so we could talk more about it. How soon could he walk?
That's a good question. The sentencing is next Friday, October 3rd. Same day, dare I say, that Taylor Swift's album comes out. So that's how I'm remembering
and
October 3rd.
My birthday,
by
the way.
Well, there you go. So there's a lot of things that are going on October 3rd. Let's just pull up a full screen really quickly to walk everybody through how we've gotten here. I mean, he was arrested at a Manhattan hotel in the lobby, September 2024. It's been a full year that he's been at the Metropolitan Detention Center, this notorious prison in Brooklyn. That and Rikers, those are two places where you just don't want to be. May 12th is when the trial began. The verdict right before the 4th of July. And like you said, he was acquitted of racketeering, RICO, and acquitted of sex trafficking. Those carried life up to life in prison. Wow. So the most he could spend is 20 years, but he's not going to get that. The prosecutors want him to spend about 5 years in prison. Like you said, his team wants time served. This judge, he's tough. He listened today as one of Combs's attorneys, Alexandra Shapiro, fought to get the prostitution charges that he was found guilty of dismissed. Judge hasn't made a decision, but I don't think that he's going to do anything about that.
If the prosecution wants him to spend at least 5 years in jail, is that 5 years minus what he has already served or in addition to?
Who knows? I mean, if you're just counting time served and the judge looks at since his not guilty, his partial verdict in July, that's just a couple months.
Yeah.
So you got to wonder, what about all the months nearly a year before the trial? Does that count? You would think that it probably would. I mean, look, when you read the 300 and something page filing that his attorneys put out yesterday saying that he has been this model prisoner, according to them, you have 70 letters, one from his mother, all saying he should be released, that he should come home, that these are prostitution charges, that this is not the more serious stuff. You also have his team saying that he's been helping teach business classes to inmates while at the MDC. So they're saying, look, he's off drugs. He's not been violent. He's a model prisoner. Let him out. So the judge has a lot to take into consideration. And let me just point out, the lead prosecutor, Maureen Comey, the daughter of James Comey.
Oh, yeah.
She doesn't have a job anymore. So she's not a part of this. And she was intense in that courtroom, and I think that's tough for the prosecution not to have her.
What a 180 turn from the trial and what he was potentially
We were talking
facing
a year ago about life in prison, and here we are talking about just a couple years. At some point, we're going to see Diddy free on the streets at some point. Does that mean new music, a book? I mean, at some point, he's going to be doing an interview. We got to get that interview.
Chloe Molas, you go get it, girl.
We'll try.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, tonight, President Trump pointing the finger at Democrats for the potential government shutdown, saying they, in his words, don't know what they're doing. His comments are coming as the White House threatens mass firings if Congress doesn't reach a deal to fund the government before next Wednesday. That is according to a memo from the Office of Management and Budget obtained by NBC News, warning federal agencies to brace for a, quote, reduction in force, potentially raising the stakes with Democrats and Republicans in another standoff over spending. I want to bring in Ryan Nobles to talk more about this. Let's start with those potential firings here and what agencies feasibly could be targeted by OMB.
Yes, when you read this memo that was put up by Russ Vought, who's the director of the Office of Management and Budget, it's pretty wide-ranging, and it leaves him personally a lot of discretion over exactly what jobs could be targeted. He says in this memo that it's any impacting programs, projects, or activities in which the discretionary funding runs out on October 1st, and that's a massive chunk of the federal government where there's not another source of funding available. And then this is the key line, not consistent with the president's priorities. And in many ways, it is Russ Vought who will get to decide that. And that has Democrats very nervous as they continue these negotiations over trying to avoid a government shutdown. There's never been the use of the federal government workforce like this in shutdown negotiations. Yasmin, in the past, we know that government workers get furloughed. Maybe they have to come in and work without getting paid. There's never been a threat of mass layoffs like this as part of a government shutdown negotiation. So far, Democrats aren't buying it. They just say it's an intimidation tactic, and the administration really doesn't have the wherewithal to pull something like this off. But it certainly has made it part of the conversation here as we approach that deadline on September 30th.
So much of this, Ryan, as you well know, is the PR of it all. Who wins the PR campaign with the American people, and who's going to be at fault if, in fact, the government shuts down? What are the potential holdouts here from both the Dems and the Republicans?
Well, you'd be surprised to learn, Yasmin, that Republicans think the Democrats are to blame and Democrats believe the Republicans are to blame. But, you know, at the fundamental core here is that the only way that this gets resolved is if both sides get something out of these negotiations. And for Democrats, that means that they're looking for something related to health care, whether that's the extension of subsidies connected to the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, or a rollback of some of the Medicaid cuts that took place during the negotiations around President Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill. So far, Republicans aren't interested in that at all. They just want to continue funding levels at their current rate for the next 7 weeks, and then they can hash out some of these more broad issues during these negotiations around the broader long-term appropriations package. Could there be some sort of deal struck where they say, hey, we will negotiate something related to Affordable Care Act subsidies in that 7-week period if you just allow us to keep the government open past 7 weeks? The leader, Hakeem Jeffries, on the House side seemed to reject that today. But at this point, anything's possible. And probably as we get closer to the deadline, maybe we'll get a better idea about what both sides really want.
By the way, you want to learn more about the shutdown and the inner workings of the Hill? Ryan Nobles is on our podcast this evening, wherever you get your podcasts. You don't want to miss it. It was a really good conversation. Thank you, Ryan Nobles.
Subscribe, right,
subscribe,
Yasmin? So every day. Yes,
yeah. All right, coming up, everybody, the daring ride down Mount Everest that is making history. Plus, what do hard pass, cold brew, and dad bod all have in common? We'll explain coming up. Welcome back. The historic settlement between Amazon and the FTC. What it could mean for your Prime account. But just in the last hour, officials in L.A. holding a briefing on a new report that blames outdated policies, staffing shortages, and a lack of resources for delays in the response to those deadly wildfires in January.
The Eden Fire was a catastrophic and complex incident. Providing answers is not a simple task, and this report is not a one and done. To our survivors, I wish there was one specific issue that was identified in this report that could have changed the course of history.
You remember the scenes of those catastrophic fires tearing through L.A., killing at least 30 people, destroying thousands upon thousands of homes. Want to bring in Dana Griffin to talk more about this. The scenes were horrific. I mean, people lost almost everything, if not everything, literally running for their lives to get out. What does this report say about what went wrong?
So it does not point the blame at one single person, entity, or one single failure. Instead, it looked at a series of weaknesses, and this is an outside independent group who was telling LA County officials what went wrong so that they can better prepare for the future in the event of another major disaster. So some of the weaknesses that they identified in this report include confusing chain of command, breakdown in comms. Not everyone was on one singular communication system, outdated and incompatible software, fear of overwarning, something that we've seen in the fire in Lahaina, where there were concerns about possibly triggering mass panic, and also a power outages and downed infrastructure also added to this. Now, while the group noted some of these weaknesses, they also noted how first responders did an amazing job, sometimes risking their own lives to save others. Listen to what else they said.
We also saw countless examples where the first responders took on unimaginable personal risk in their efforts to save and protect their communities. To the first responders on the front lines, this report is not an indictment of your commitment to your communities or to your profession.
And county officials say that this is just the first steps. They've already started implementing some of those changes and say that they will be prepared. And right now we're in the middle of wildfire season. So they said if another fire were to happen today, they would be able to respond better than how they responded in January. Yasmin?
What are some of those changes, Dana?
Yeah, so part of the changes, and we'll pull up a graphic so you can see them exactly. They want to streamline the evacuation roles and decision making. They want to expand cross-agency training and also maybe include some of the community so that they are preparing when you've got those high volume areas and you need to evacuate them quickly. They want to upgrade the aging equipment and fill staffing gaps. They noted gaps at emergency management and also the sheriff's office, and they want to modernize software for real-time coordination and also improve the community alerts and community outreach, making sure that everyone knows the plan ahead of time so that they aren't relying and waiting on law enforcement to give them the evacuation order, them to be able to say, okay, this doesn't look good, I just need to go.
Dana Griffin, thank you. I appreciate it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Amazon reaching a historic $2.5 billion settlement with the FTC over allegations the company tricked customers into paying for Prime memberships and making it hard for people to cancel them. Amazon will now refund something like 35 million people, but they're not admitting to any wrongdoing, according to the settlement. Amazon telling NBC News in a statement in part, quote, Amazon and our executives have always followed the law, and this settlement allows us to move forward and focus on innovating for customers. Number 2, the suspect accused of shooting at the ABC affiliate in Sacramento is trying to get out of jail before trial. He's just been denied bail from a federal judge, but still could get bail on state charges. No one was hurt in the shooting. Our Sacramento affiliate reports the government plans to show the suspect is dangerous. The DA has said the alleged shooter might have been motivated in part by the network's suspension of Jimmy. In public school curriculums is stepping down. Ryan Walters had been state superintendent since 2023. He's taken the head job for the conservative educators group, the Teacher Freedom Alliance. Walters saying in his announcement, quote, "We're going to destroy the teachers' unions." All right, number 4, a Polish athlete making history as the first person to ever ski down Mount Everest without any extra oxygen. You can see the 37-year-old right here. He climbed for like 16 hours to the summit, and he skied all the way down, only relying on his lungs. Let's talk the dictionary. Merriam-Webster is adding new words to the collegiate dictionary for the first time in decades, and not a few words, 5,000 of them. If you're not chronically online, you might not recognize some of these, like Riz, or by the way, if you don't have teenagers, Riz, hard pass, side-eye, dad bod, and doom scroll. The update comes out in mid-November. All right, coming up. How unexplained drone sightings are making a mess of air travel in part of Europe. Why some say this is Russia trolling NATO. Plus, inside the rescue of a California man who became trapped after falling off a cliff. All right, Europe is on edge tonight after a wave of drone flyovers forced flight cancellations at 4 airports in Denmark with suspicions that Russia is behind it all. Danish officials say the flyovers are meant to sow fear. Russia, for its part, says the drones are a, quote, staged provocation, and they reject any speculation that they are involved. NATO is now warning Russia to stop what it's calling escalatory actions after Russian drones also entered Estonian airspace last week. NATO warships are conducting exercises in a massive show of force across Europe. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, is leading the way in naval drills. Matt Bodner is joining us now from Oslo, Norway, to talk more about this. Hey, Matt, you actually spent some time on board the USS Ford yesterday. What message are these NATO maneuvers sending to Russia?
Well, thanks, Yasmin. Well, obviously, this is a massive NATO maneuver. It's taking place in the North Sea. That's where we were on the Ford yesterday. There's also NATO ships in the Baltic and in the Mediterranean, NATO ground forces in Eastern Europe. And this is basically an effort to demonstrate that NATO can coordinate across multiple militaries and multiple theaters, all with an eye on the east. That would be to say Russia. And so one of the core messages here that NATO is sending is that it doesn't actually need to deploy a large amount of military equipment permanently in Eastern Europe. It can get to Eastern Europe very quickly and respond to anything that might happen there. And while we were on the Ford yesterday, we actually spoke to her strike group commander, that is Rear Admiral Paul Lanzalota, and he had this to say to us.
You can take this ship and the ships around us and move several hundred miles overnight and then operate from there. And the aircraft that operate from the flight deck, as you probably can tell, they go hundreds of miles in and of themselves. So our touch can reach a far distance from the ship.
So we actually heard from NATO officials separately that some of the planes that we saw take off from the Ford yesterday, they were actually flying, some of them, 1,000 miles to the east, to Finland, Poland, Lithuania, to patrol, but also to take part in live fire exercise with NATO forces there.
So while we've got this kind of show of force between NATO countries, we also had President Trump this week with some pretty harsh criticism for European allies.
It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you, I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell.
So he's talking about European countries there, saying they're going to hell. He has made a bit of an about face amidst that criticism when it comes to Ukraine, turning away from Russian President Vladimir Putin. Is Putin here threatening Europe to not support Ukraine the way in which he feels as if the United States is doing now?
That's a great question, and that's actually, one of the conversations that's happening here in Europe is, obviously President Trump is sort of shifting back and forth quite regularly on this issue, and there is pressure that is being obviously placed on Europe. The European allies are the target of these drone incursions, and essentially what it looks like the Kremlin is trying to do is to convince them, let's say, for example, the United States, whatever it does, says that NATO can buy weapons to support Ukraine to whatever extent it wants to. That's certainly what the White House is signaling now. The Kremlin is now trying to make things extremely uncomfortable for the European allies and sort of split them, get them on different pages on how to respond to this. We've seen some discussion on how to respond, for example, to drone incursions. There's been a lot of talk about should we shoot down a future Russian aircraft incursion. And there have been some dissenting voices on this saying that that's exactly what Putin wants. So he is testing the Europeans now.
Matt Bodner, it looks cold there, so stay warm while you're outside doing these live hits for us. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, NBC covers hundreds of stories every day, and because it's tough to read, watch, or listen to all of them, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment that we call The Local. Out of our Southern Bureau, a construction worker in Florida now in the hospital after a wall fell on him in Fort Lauderdale. The man apparently working in a trench when the wall crumbled on top of him. Rescue crews pulled him out of the rubble. He was seriously hurt, but is expected to be okay. Building inspectors are investigating how exactly this happened. Out of our Western Bureau, a bike ride in San Diego taking a super dangerous turn. Look at this. Border Patrol agents rescuing a mountain biker who fell off a 50-foot cliff and into a remote canyon there. The agents were coincidentally monitoring the area when they heard a cry for help. He'd been stranded for nearly 6 hours and was seriously hurt in the fall. Crews airlifted him to a nearby hospital. Out of our Northeast Bureau, New York subway riders are about to hear a new voice while riding across stations in the city.
Ride safe, keep it cute, and keep it moving.
Yes, that is the one and only Cardi B, the newest voice behind the PSAs for the MTA. It's all part of the latest push to cut down dangerous behavior in subways. The rapper's announcements will run through the end of the year. We're following some breaking news just into us. A senior Justice Department official telling NBC News former FBI Director James Comey has been indicted. Apparently a 2-count indictment. Those charges based on testimony that Comey gave back in September of 2020. He was responding to a question from Senator Ted Cruz about the authorization of an information leak.
On May 3rd, 2017, in this committee, Chairman Grassley asked you point blank, quote, have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation? You responded under oath, quote, never. He then asked you, quote, have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton administration? You responded again under oath, no. Now, as you know, Mr. McCabe, who works for you, has publicly and repeatedly stated that he leaked information to the Wall Street Journal and that you were directly aware of it and that you directly authorized it. Now, what Mr. McCabe is saying and what you testified to this committee cannot both be true. One or the other is false. Who's telling the truth?
I can only speak to my testimony. I stand by what the testimony you summarized that I gave in May of 2017.
And that is why he has now been indicted on 2 of 3 counts. The president has long been critical of Comey, who you'll remember started that investigation into Russian meddling back in the 2016 presidential election and possible ties to the Trump campaign. Something that the president has long called the investigation a hoax and a witch hunt. Want to bring in Misty Maris for legal analysis here. Let's walk through the charges so far, the indictment so far. 2 of 3 counts, 1 count of making false statements, 2nd count of obstruction of justice based upon the testimony that I just played for folks back in 2020. What do you make of what we're seeing come in so far?
So first, when you're talking about an indictment, the standard is very, very low. There's very little that a federal prosecutor will need to put before a grand jury to secure an indictment. It's probable cause. That's the lowest level of the wall. There's the old adage, you can indict a ham sandwich. That's something I say all the time. What does that mean for actually proving a case? That is leaps and bounds different when you get to trial. False statements, this is what we expected, something perjury type type charge, obstruction of justice that's interfering with anything in the process of investigation or anything in the legal process. And what I would say is this false statement charge specifically, this is incredibly difficult. Probably why there was some hesitation before this went to the grand jury. Affirm false, and there has to be intent. So this is an intent crime.
Well, you talked about how there was kind of pause in bringing this to a grand jury, and you're talking specifically about the stepping down of Eric Siebert, who was a U.S. attorney at the Eastern District of Virginia, who essentially said, as we learned from reporting, that he had some trepidation about the fact that there was enough evidence.
Yes, and from a prosecutor's perspective, when you're talking about getting an indictment, again, lower standard, when you're talking about a prosecutor's obligation, what they need to take into consideration to bring a case into court, they have to analyze the case.
They want to win it going in.
Can we bring this case and prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? And it's not even about winning. It's doing the right thing for the right reasons. That's what federal prosecutors say. So it's an analysis of whether or not the evidence supports the charges, and there's enough evidence to get over that very high standard of proof and burden that's on prosecutors beyond a reasonable doubt.
Want to bring in Vaughn Hilliard to the conversation as well, and I'm looking down at my phone, folks, because I just want to bring up Attorney General Pam Bondi's social media post in reaction to this most recent indictment on 2 of 3 counts of James Comey, former FBI director, in which she says no one is above the law. Today's indictment, my phone just went a little nuts on this. All right. Today's indictment reflects this Department of Justice's commitment to holding those who abuse positions of power accountable for misleading the American people. We will follow the facts in this case. Vaughn Hilliard, walk us through what more you're learning about this indictment.
Yeah, this, I think some pretext to this, I think, is important. And that is that the President of the United States has called for the jailing of James Comey for numerous years now. Folks will recall that during his first administration, he fired James Comey as FBI director. And after leaving, James Comey wrote a book and said that Donald Trump ran the White House more like a mob and said that it was all about loyalty. Fast forward over the last years, again, the president in social media posts and publicly has suggested that James Comey should be in jail. And that is what ultimately led to him calling for the prosecution of James Comey. And last Friday, the U.S. attorney of the Eastern District of Virginia, who had been tasked with investigating James Comey, ultimately resigned. This was a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney. And in that attorney's place, over late Saturday night, the president, in a social media post, in what seemed to be more like a text message to Pam Bondi, the attorney general, but in a social media post form, called on her to tap Lindsay Halligan, who has been his longtime legal ally. She had worked as his own personal defense attorney during the classified documents case, had called on her to be put into that position in place. She had been working here at the White House as an aide. So she was actually formally sworn in just this last Monday, went down and clearly opted to go before the grand jury to try to bring these charges against James Comey to the grand jury, and was able to get the indictment. Now, the president has suggested that James Comey was guilty of a lot more of this, right, this idea of a Russian collusion hoax there. But what ultimately the grand jury has indicted him on apparently is a false statement, which we believe to be that, in which he had suggested under oath in front of Congress in 2020 that he had not authorized the leak of particular certain information to the news media. And we believe that that is potentially what this indictment was on here. But ultimately, he's going to get his opportunity to have his own defense team go and make their case in front of a jury in the court of law.
This is a real full circle moment for the president, I imagine, because during his campaign in 2024, he said he was going after his political opponents. He sees James Comey as political opponent number 1 from the 2016 election. Misty, real quick, we got 20 seconds. What's next for Comey after this indictment?
Well, I imagine you're going to see him challenge it. You're going to see him challenge it on the grounds that this is directed at him. There's evidence that lacks. It does not satisfy that probable cause standard.
Misty, Vaughn, thank you guys both. Appreciate it. Coverage of this breaking news story continues right now on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.